But Survey, we're talking about the World Economic Forum. You're, you're no stranger to the World Economic Forum, having attended more than 10 times. What does the forum represent to you, Emma? What is significance in today's world?
The World Economic Forum is an important institution in terms of the uh, business community in the world and increasingly politically with academics, with consultancy firms, with technology pioneers, and the world's most innovative companies. So my experience is that WEF is very much a place to meet the top people in the world at that point in time. So this, you're right, this is my, I think it's my 12th or plus Davos, which officially makes me a Davos veteran, in that someone who's attended for more than 10 years. And I'm looking forward to the meeting in Davos in Switzerland in a week's time, starting next week at Monday. It comes at an interesting time. World Economic Forum is coming at a very interesting time. Now, I think that in the past, the World Economic Forum was very much inclined to look at the world and increasingly the influence of China in the world. And hence there's also the Summit Davos meeting. But the recent developments in Europe, in Ukraine, and also in the Middle East, I think is going to result in the World Economic Forum's discussions being dominated towards a more insular Europe and a more sort of Western framework as opposed to in the past. And one can almost see that in terms of the panels and all of these things. But I think that's quite normal, to be frank. I think the World Economic Forum, we mustn't forget, is a Swiss organization. It is located in Europe, and at the end of it, its core constituency remains, Western business leaders, the lead of the Western business community, and the political community.
Fascinating. So you say the World Economic Forum moves with the times. I think that the forum has evolved over the years, over the course of your 12 visits, especially in addressing the challenges of the day.
So I've been unique in a sense, is that I've attended the World Economic Forum in 3 different guises. So initially I attended it with as part of a delegation in my capacity as a medical doctor with one of the former presidents. Then I attended it as a social entrepreneur when I was starting out in business. And then I attended it as, in my own right, as the chairman of the Second Jolly Group. We were invited by the World Economic Forum in 2007 to become a member, and then of course attended Davos and the Summit Davos meetings, in total probably about 20 times or so. So I've been able to see the World Economic Forum from 3 different angles, so to speak. I saw it when I was still very much inclined to be a socialist and a community and activist-driven doctor. And I saw the elite of the world from the point of view that, well, these were the bad capitalists of the world meeting in the Swiss Alps. And then through the Schwab Foundation and as a social entrepreneur, I saw a very different side. I saw the World Economic Forum giving space to social entrepreneurs that were using business to do good in diverse parts of the world, whether it was in India, whether it was in Chile, Brazil, whether it was, in Africa, in different parts of the world. So I saw that good side of it, where it actually gave a lot of prominence to social entrepreneurship and the concept that, you could be an entrepreneur to do good. And I was very lucky to be part of that social entrepreneur sort of ecosystem of the World Economic Forum. And then when we became a member of the World Economic Forum, it was very exciting because here we were, rubbing shoulders with the Googles, the Microsofts, the Coca-Colas, or, the big corporations of the world. And we were literally rubbing shoulders because, you could be in the conference center and you would be able to have a cup of tea with some of the world's most wealthiest people. You could chat to them informally. You could have formal meetings. You could listen to panels. So the first couple of years, it was probably the best networking opportunity that we've ever had as a group, that I've ever had, because we could meet up with multinational organizations. We could meet up with, I'm an Harvard alumnus, attend the Harvard alumni function. We could meet up with university professors, scientists, and actors and actresses and writers and novelists. And it was just an incredibly high energy driven, and you never slept for 5 days. You're literally up in the mornings to do your pre-breakfast meetings, and you'd go to bed at maybe 2 a.m. in the morning. So if for those 5 days, you'd have 2-3 hours sleep. And it's extremely cold in Davos. And so you walk, in the evenings, you do what is called the functions that the countries have at night time. So it'll be the Indonesian night, or you'd go to a party, the Mackenzie party, then you go to a nightcap, which is held by maybe one of the big consulting firms. And it's just a very, very rich experience. And you get to meet the most amazing people, not just, the top leaders of business, but you meet very interesting people, because many will attend Davos, not as participants in the World Economic Forum. We've been a participant in the World Economic Forum since 2007. But many will come to Davos to hang out, if so to speak, at side meetings or the hotels, and they're very interesting people, by the way. Of course, you have lots of journalists, you have tons of journalists, and we, our own media grouping, has over the past year sent about 20, different editors and journalists to Davos over the years for the African News Agency and for independent media. So it's a very rich experience, but it's changed. It's changed in a way that the world has become more serious. And so, prior to COVID, the agenda became a lot more serious about the business topics, the global topics, and the potential crises and all of those things. And so after COVID as well, there's this huge reluctance in the world to work together, well, one would think. And certainly the Africa agenda has literally been sidelined. I don't think deliberately so. I think it's been sidelined because the European agenda, the American agenda, has become far more prominent now in Davos. It was so, the last few meetings, especially the last meeting, Ukraine dominated the Davos discussions, over-dominated Davos discussions. Whereas I don't think it was, something that was necessarily fair. And Africa, as I said, has fallen off the cliff. South Africa certainly is off the Davos agenda completely, which is really sad because, we spent a lot of time and energy putting South Africa very much in the minds of Davos participants. And we were very successful doing that during the years of Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. But during Ramaphosa's years and Davos, there was one year he just cancelled at the last minute, which you don't do for Davos. And, he came with great hope in his first year to Davos as president. And then, the nonsense that he said at Davos, he tried to repeat in the second year. And frankly speaking, investors, the Davos community lost trust in, what he was saying. And while he was seen as a great hope and a reformer, certainly from the market economy point of view, the general consensus in Davos now is that he is a huge disappointment. South Africa is a huge disappointment. And so the interest level in the South Africa days, not days, it's the South Africa session, where you meet with international business leaders to talk about, it is increasingly less, because less important people attend that than in the past.
How do we bring South Africa back onto the agenda to focus at the World Economic Forum?
Well, I don't think that they're going to take Ramaphosa seriously ever again. I don't think there's confidence in Ramaphosa or his ministers. That's, what friends tell me, colleagues tell me, especially last year. The general feeling was that, he's not to be trusted as someone that says something and does something different. And I think there's just a general disillusionment with South Africa. And then, of course, it's not great for them when they see the attacks on groups like us. We've been a World Economic Forum member, one of really very few South African companies, besides the big banks and the big mining houses and SOEs. Maybe 2 or 3 entrepreneurs such as, Koos Becker, Patrice Motsepe and myself. And then there's no one else really from an entrepreneurship point of view that, is invited to the World Economic Forum meetings. So when people see that, the state smears business people like myself or launches a campaign using state institutions, it becomes a problem because, we have huge credibility in these forums, huge credibility. And so when they see that, the president and the government are behind these kind of attacks, they say, well, if they can treat their, successful South African business people like this, can you imagine what they can do to international investors? So I think, despite my efforts to say to international investors, look, ignore the president, ignore, these ministers, South Africa is a really good place to invest. And I keep on saying that because, it's our country and we need investment and we need, I just saw a statistic the other day. We have a 58% unemployment amongst the youth, which puts us at the number 1 spot in the world for unemployment. Number 1. I mean, the next biggest is Palestine with 37%. And we know what's happening in Palestine. So, how do you have a situation where where youth unemployment is so high. And so therefore investment into the country is a good thing, because any investment, whether it's by the local business community or by the international business community, helps to create employment, which we desperately need in our country. But I think people are not going to invest in South Africa. And hence, President Ramaphosa, when he has his investment conferences, he talks about having R1 trillion worth of investments. But the truth is, it's all just hogwash. None of that has materialized, because if it did, we wouldn't have the jobs crises, unemployment, economic downturn that we're seeing. I mean, the statistics speak for themselves. No matter how much you dress up these conferences that he claims people have invested, the reality is they haven't invested. So it makes it very hard for people like myself, who are ambassadors for our country, to convince people to come down here and invest in South Africa. And I think it will continue to be hard and very difficult whilst Ramaphosa remains president.
Unemployment is a negative word. Another bad word is load shedding. How do the participants at the forum react to load shedding? The problem with South Africa's ability to supply reliable power, and especially to companies and corporations hoping to invest in South Africa. Have you managed to convince the world that South Africa is able to resolve its electricity crisis?
I think we're the laughingstock of the international community, because we're an industrialized economy. We've always prided ourselves on being the most industrialized economy of Africa, on par with other industrialized economies, not in size, but in terms of industrialization itself. Now we have an absurd situation where we are no different to Nigeria, where there is constant power outages, or Zimbabwe, or many other African countries. The last World Economic Forum meeting, one of the heads of one of the global banks and I were having a coffee together. And he said to me, look, could you explain what has happened in South Africa in terms of these power outages and why is it happening? I say it's very simple. If you look at the presidencies, you look at Thabo Mbeki, there was no load shedding. If you look at Jacob Zuma, there was practically no load shedding. If you look at Ramaphosa, the load shedding is non-stop. In other words, the state institutions have all collapsed. So what you have to ask is that a structural problem, or is the problem elsewhere? Now, because they worked under even Jacob Zuma's presidency, which was described as the state capture years because of the Gupta family, but they worked. So what has happened that when you have a so-called reformer and the state institutions have collapsed? Why is that so? And I can tell you why. It's collapsed because Ramaphosa and his Minister of Public Enterprises firmly believes in the privatization of these state institutions. And they believe it because, firstly, philosophically, they believe that the private sector can run better operations than the state, which is not true, by the way. If you look at China as a good example of that, and if you look at South Africa during the Thabo Mbeki, Mandela and Zuma years, where it was run by the state sector. Secondly, they and their funders that have funded them politically want to privatize the state institutions to be able to benefit financially. So for them, the collapse of state institutions is a good thing, because then they can break them up, unbundle them, and sell them off to their cronies in the private sector, and then become super rich. I mean, if you take an institution like Eskom, I always tell people this, very important to remember this. Eskom has spent about between 5 and 700 billion on infrastructure. In a normal situation, Eskom should generate about 50 billion profit a year in a normal situation. Right now, Eskom is hugely loss-making because they did not repair the power stations. They are using fuel like diesel, etc. But if Eskom collapses, which is going to collapse because that is the intention of the Ramaphosa administration, and it is sold to the private sector, Ramaphosa and Pravin Gordhan's friends, it will very quickly work, because it works in any case, just that they're not making it work, and it will become super profitable for those investors that have acquired the business for next to nothing. And you just have to look at South African Airways, because that's the playbook. So South African Airways was Africa's best airline for 14 years in a row. And yes, it had made losses, and yes, there were questions around it. But the truth is, South Africa had a very viable national airline flying internationally into Africa in local routes, etc. And what did Ramaphosa and his minister Pravin Gordhan do? Well, they said they wanted to save money and prevent the treasury from putting in any more money. And so they restructured South African Airways to make it the smallest airline in South Africa today, and virtually a non-existent airline in terms of ownership of its planes and all those kind of things. It became a shell, but then sold it to their friends for 51 Rand. Yet still keeping the roots and doing all of those things. So you have a situation where South African Airways, fantastic airline, by all accounts, is now really being transitioned into private hands for next to nothing, with no accountability to Parliament, with the intention it will become a super profitable airline. So that formula works also at Eskom, where Eskom can be fixed tomorrow morning, but there is no willpower to fix it, because the money doesn't lie in fixing Eskom. The money lies in breaking it down, selling it for nothing to their friends, then fixing it, and then making super profits at the expense of the country and the state. And so we'll continue. So you'll see that load shedding will be fixed for 3 months prior to the national elections. They'll use 10 billion, 20 billion rands worth of diesel, burn that, which ultimately South Africans are going to have to pay for. And then soon after that, load shedding will continue. and then they'll sell off. They'll unbundle the transmission section, the power generation section, and at the end of the day, they're going to give to their friends an investment valued at R1 trillion. That's the game plan. It's as simple as that. There's nothing complicated about it. International investors see through this kind of thing. They see that you're dealing with a kleptocracy and cronies that are looting the system, and who don't really care about the country. So when they talk about load shedding, the problem can be fixed tomorrow morning, but there is no intention to fix it.
Interesting views and interesting times. Does anyone want to talk about a changing world order and the rise of groups like BRICS? How significant are these changes in discussions at the World Economic Forum?
The World Economic Forum has a summer Davos meeting which takes place in Dalian or Tianjin once a year as well. And in a way, the summer Davos meeting was given equal stature to the Davos meeting in Switzerland. But it also represents the participation of businesses from the East and the South at that summer Davos meeting, mainly Chinese and Asian businesses. So there is definitely, an acknowledgement through the summer Davos meeting, which is a big meeting of the World Economic Forum, that, we are in a multipolar world. But that's almost like a tacit acknowledgement, because at its core, Davos in Switzerland remains a Western, Swiss, European institution. And I mean, that's fine. That's what it is. There's nothing wrong with that. It's unlikely to ever become an institution that is multipolar, although it provides space for multipolarity in terms of its sessions, its events, those kind of things. BRICS is initially a political formation. It is like the G7, the G20. It's a political formation. But now, with what's happened in Ukraine and Russian sanctions, and increasingly potential sanctions against China, and on the technology front, the treatment of Chinese companies such as Huawei and TikTok, etc., BRICS is taking on the mantle of an economic formation as well. I've always said, formerly as the BRICS Business Council chairman, firstly of South Africa and then of the 5 countries, as its president of the 5 countries, I always maintained that BRICS is a 20 to 30 year project. Because that's how the Chinese think. The Chinese are the main backers of BRICS. And they do not think in terms of, next year or 5 years. They think 20, 30 years. And they are quite happy for BRICS to limp along, every year, but slowly, incrementally become important. That was always the plan. It was never that BRICS would become important next year. So it is the Chinese philosophy to think in terms of decades as opposed to years. However, with the global crisis right now, with the threat of American sanctions, and actual sanctions and European sanctions against Russia and potentially against China, that has forced the acceleration of BRICS. That has forced the acceleration of the BRICS currency, for example. It's forced the acceleration of these countries working together. Now with the involvement of the additional 5 countries in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, UAE, Ethiopia, which is some of the world's top oil producers, right? And importantly, oil consumer in India and China. That is really shifted the global balance faster than one would have expected. So, if you ask me, are we rapidly going towards a multipolar world? My answer is yes, and it would be achieved by 2030. If you'd ask me the same question prior to Ukraine and prior to Middle East crises and the South China Sea crises and the Taiwanese crisis, I would have said by 2050. I would have said by 2050, China and the BRICS countries would have dominated the world in terms of size, economic size, political and militarily. My view now is that the BRICS countries will dominate the world by 2030. Not just dominate, the Chinese economy will probably double the US economy, because there is now an aggressive momentum to accelerate that, which unfortunately goes against the Chinese culture of doing things. But the Chinese have adapted to being, see, one of the things that made American corporates so successful in the world, I mean, so successful that if you don't forget, America was founded out of Europe. It was the Europeans that went to America that, in a way, colonized America, right? So, for a long time, I mean, the British and the French, were the owners of America, so to speak. But America's aggressiveness saw them bypass Europe many times over. And it's that aggression in terms of politics and business which has made America, the world's sole power until recently. Now what's happened is that the Chinese and the Russians and the Indians, who by their nature are very slow in terms of adopting these sort of aggressive expansionist principles, if you like.
Do you feel that South Africa, in terms of its foreign policy, is positioning itself correctly to straddle east and west while also being part of Africa?
I think South Africa takes its cue from Mandela. So Mandela was one of the strongest proponents for what we call the non-aligned movement. And Mandela's generation, is a generation that understood the Bandung Conference in Indonesia in 1955 that led to the formation in the 1970s of the non-aligned movement. And that has always been the viewpoint of Mandela's generation, that we don't take sides. We are non-aligned insofar as the East and the West are concerned, because at that time we're dealing with the Cold War between Russia or the Soviet Union on the one side and Cuba and others, and on the other side the United States and Western Europe. Now, that has always been the position of South Africa. That is a position that Thabo Mbeki followed, and truth be told, that is the position that Ramaphosa has to follow. He doesn't have a choice here, because the DNA of the ruling party, the ANC, is very much rooted in this non-aligned system, if you like. If you look at Mandela's Thabo Mbeki's inauguration, the biggest cheers at those inaugurations were for Fidel Castro, for Robert Mugabe, for Yasser Arafat when he had come, to visit Mandela as well. So within the DNA of the ANC, the ruling party in South Africa today, it's very difficult to change from that non-aligned position. However, Mandela had, and to an extent Jacob Zuma, they had the ability to speak straight to the international community. So when they spoke, they were not ambiguous about what it is they stood for. You may not agree with them, but they said, we are standing for this. With the Ramaphosa administration, the problem is that there's ambiguity. On the one hand, when Ramaphosa meets the Americans, he says to them that he is with them. And they believe him at face value. Then he goes to the British and the Germans, and he says, I'm with you. Then he meets Putin, and he says, I'm with you.
The crowd leader.
And then he meets Xi Jinping, and he says, I'm with you. Now, you can't do that, because it's very quickly that people find out that you are not being truthful, because it's determined by your actions. So when you have that kind of ambiguity, when you have his ministers, they themselves are confused, because he'll go to Saudi Arabia to collect money for the ANC and for himself. And he'll say, I'm with you. Go to the UAE and say, I'm with you. He'll go to Qatar, he'll say, I'm with you. But at the same time, he will go to his the friends of Israel and say, no, I'm actually with you, because many of his advisors are Jewish South African business leaders that form part of Ramaphosa's inner core. So the problem is, his ministers, they don't know what's going on anymore. And so they just follow the DNA of the ANC, which is the non-aligned structures. And it's very difficult for Ramaphosa to actually fight that, because, it's a deeply rooted tradition of the ANC, the ruling party, that, we follow in the tradition of Mandela in promoting non-alignment. So South Africa, is at an important crossroads, in that it has the worst leader in the post-democracy era. And therefore, any decision that it makes internationally will be a bad decision. As Mandela could stand in front of an American audience and say, you will not tell me who's going to be my friends. Ramaphosa would never do that. He will stand in front of the Americans and say, you tell me who's my friend, okay, I listen to you. And then he'll go to the very opposite people and say, I'm your friends, don't worry what I said to the Americans. No, it doesn't work like that.
Tough question for you. In Davos 2023, you mentioned that the Russia and Ukrainian war dominated the headlines and dominated the agenda, the world economic story. This year, in the week preceding Davos, South Africa is taking Israel to the International Court of Justice with genocide and issues. Do you think that this will weaken or strengthen South Africa's position at this year's World Economic Forum next week?
Look, the question of the Middle East is a very complex one. Very complex one. It's a European problem. It's Europe that created the problem in the Middle East. Notwithstanding that, people forget that the Middle East was created by Lord Balfour, the British Prime Minister, who relocated Jews to what was then Palestine because of what had happened in Europe at the time of Nazism and the Holocaust, and etc. And the Europeans at that point in time, Britain in particular, were the colonizer in Palestine. We mustn't also forget that. And in the Middle East. Many of the Middle Eastern states were colonized by what was then referred to as Great Britain. So the Middle Eastern problem is a European problem. Over time, because of oil and because the US is the world's most industrialized economy, it became an American problem. And it also allowed the American industrial complex to generate, billions of dollars in armament sales by having almost, so it's very simple economics. You have the Arab countries that are exceedingly wealthy because they have oil. You create a bogey state and you militarize it, which is Israel. And then you say to Israel, we will arm you to teeth. And then you say to all the Arab countries, we'll arm you so you can fight against Israel and your enemies. And then you create division amongst the Arab countries themselves. And so in doing that, you sell hundreds of billions of dollars worth of armaments into the Middle East. And so all the profits these Arab countries make from the oil all go across to the American economy. And that is very simple. That's all it is. So America doesn't care crap about Israel. What America cares about is the politics of money. And so Israel suits America. And it suits America to have this conflict in the Middle East because it is about supplying armaments to the Middle East. People in Israel, people in Palestine, people in the Middle East need to find peace with each other. That is a fundamental principle. You cannot wish away anybody, no matter how much you try. You cannot use historic mistakes and say, well, you're wishing away people. But there has to be a serious attempt for real lasting peace in the Middle East in the interest of the people of Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East. And why is this application by South Africa so important in the International Court of Justice? It's important because it is sending the signal to Israel and America that you cannot simply commit the kind of genocide that you're doing in the Middle East, in Palestine. Because right up to now, the solution that America and Netanyahu had for the Middle East and for Israel was to bomb the hell out of their opponents or to put their opponents into concentration camps. And by doing that, it would create an Israeli dominance in the area. There are hundreds and thousands of Israelis themselves that have protested against Netanyahu, that have said what you are doing is wrong. And in fact, what you are doing is going to lead to the destruction of the state of Israel. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans, of Europeans that have gone to the streets in those countries who historically are friends of Israel and have come out against what Israel is doing. They are coming out against what Israel is doing because they care about Israel and they care about the Jewish people. That's why. And what Netanyahu is doing is not in the interest of Jewish people. What Netanyahu is doing, Netanyahu is a dictator, he's a right-wing, he's a militarist, and he is advocating policies which are genocidal. I don't think we must make the mistake of confusing Netanyahu with the people of Israel. And to give you an analogy, Eugene Terblanche in South Africa was a right-wing guy who was doing exactly what Netanyahu does not represent the entire Afrikaner community. And I think the International Court of Justice will be a wake-up call to, one, the Americans, two, the Europeans, and three, Netanyahu himself, to say you cannot get away with, this kind of thing. And hopefully, it will lead to a real serious discussion of all the powers that be for a lasting peace in the Middle East. Because that's what you need. You need to have peace for everybody. And for the Jewish people in Israel, for the Palestinians, the two-state solution, and for the neighbors of, Israel and Palestine. And I think we have to aim for that. When people look at military solutions, it's very easy to see that as a solution, either side. But it can never. Military solutions are only, things that you do out of desperation. It can never be the solution. So we must advocate for peace. And so South Africa, from the time of Nelson Mandela, has always been an advocate for peace in the world, advocate for peace in Africa. I think Thabo Mbeki can rightfully claim that it was largely through his initiatives that Africa went from coup d'etats to coup d'etats to coup d'etats to largely a peaceful continent as a result of the initiatives of South Africa. Dlamini Zuma, as the African Union chair, presided over the most peaceful period in African history, where there were hardly any coup d'etats in Africa. Whereas if you go back 20, 30 years, African coup d'etats were there by the week. African governments were unstable. So that is the philosophy of South Africa. And I think the Minister of Foreign Affairs, or International Relations and Cooperation, as we call it here in South Africa, Naledi Pandor, understands, that philosophy, because her father, and grandfather, they were founder members of the African National Congress. And they grew up in that tradition, of just doing the right thing and finding peace and, justice. Those are global values. And I must say again, those are the values that hundreds and thousands, if not millions of Jews in the world share as well. And we must never confuse the militarism of Netanyahu with, or for that matter, even Hamas, with Muslim people and Jewish people in the world that genuinely want to live together in harmony with each other and have peace. And if the International Court of Justice leads to the outcome, which is not punitive, but which leads to a solution of peace,
then it must be welcome. Coming back to the World Economic Forum, you've been privileged enough to serve on as a member of a number of panels and chaired a number of top banks. Now, it's a world in turmoil, wars on numerous fronts and regions. South Africa facing a number of crises. How do you sell, as a businessman, how do you sell South Africa to the world market as an international community? How do you what is attractive, what is unattractive, and how do you solve
as a South African, you are obligated personally to defend your country. You're obligated to encourage investment into your country. I always say you never wash your dirty linen in public, right?
What's the sales pitch? It's a tough sell.
The sales pitch is that Ramaphosa is not going to be there forever. Ramaphosa has created such a mess that hopefully a new leadership emerges after Ramaphosa, either from within the ANC or outside the ANC, or through the democratic process, which has to be better than Ramaphosa, and which therefore offers a wonderful investment opportunity for international investors. But to be frank, I am not going to put my international credibility on the line and say to people they must invest in South Africa under Ramaphosa. I'm not going to say to them they must not invest either, but I'm not going to be able to really put my hand on my heart and say to people, come and invest under this government, because I know that this government is not interested in the development of this country. It is interested in looting the country. That's what I know. I know that Ramaphosa's objective is very different to the objective of Nelson Mandela.
With your unique insights into World Economic Forum, a networking or hobnobbing platform or venue for elite 1% billionaires club, or is it a place where is the World Economic Forum a place where meaningful global policy can be shaped?
I always remember Bishop Tutu famously saying, Archbishop Tutu, that won the Nobel Peace Prize. He used to say, a knife is an instrument that you can use to kill someone. Or a knife is an instrument that you can use to cut up a loaf of bread and distribute those slices to many different people, including the poor. The way I see the World Economic Forum is that you can go there with the approach that you've got a knife, that you want to conquer the world, be very greedy, be someone that's not interested in the world. Or you can go there with a knife that says, okay, let me use such an institution which is important, which has existed for a long time, which has the elite of the world, to help to create a better world. That is my goal when I go to the World Economic Forum. I try and make sure that the discussions are enriched with a perspective which is about a shared humanity. In particular, about Africa being part of that shared humanity and South Africa being part of that. And yes, the World Economic Forum is about the 0.01% of the world. It is a fact. You're not going to run away from that. It is a place where you bump into billionaires, where you party through the night but it's also a place for very serious discussion. And that depends on you. It's your call what you want to make of it. You can either go there with the clear intention that you want to make a difference, or you can go there with the clear intention that you just want to be part of the global elite and the party. I always famously quote Groucho Marx when he says, I don't want to be a member of a club that wants me as a member. Right. So for me, I'm not going to the World Economic Forum because I need to be part of this elite, or told I'm part of elite of a stature. I'm not a guy that's interested in that kind of bullshit, frankly speaking. I'm very happy with simple things in life. So if I wanted to be going there because, in fact, I don't particularly like going there because of the weather. It's that time of the year where it's a Swiss winter, where it's ice cold, it's snow, it's terribly cold at night. For 5 days, I'm not going to sleep. 5 days, I'll be busy in meetings, engagements. It's tough. It's 5 days of being very, very tough. But I go there because if I don't use the opportunity that presents itself to become an advocate for a very different world, then we lose that opportunity. That's the truth. Because there are very few people like myself that are part of the 0.01% and who are interested in a different world and who really have no interest in money. Frankly, I just don't have any interest in money. Never had any interest in money. I still don't have interest in money today. I am interested in, finding a way that you can use the market economy, you can use business for good. As Amartya Sen, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate says, how do you do good and well at the same time? So I'm an advocate for the market economy. I'm not a socialist. I was a socialist in my early days of my life. I'm a capitalist. I'm a market proponent because I do believe that the market economy can make a huge difference to the world. But you need to have discipline and you need to temper yourself and you need to think about, what is the purpose of all of this? So I have a purpose in going to the World Economic Forum, and that purpose is to share the view that it is possible to have a better world if we're less greedy, if we're prepared to share, if we're prepared to engage with others, and to find peace, and to have difficult conversations about finding peace.
Surve, thank you for joining us and sharing your fairly enlightening perspectives on the World Economic Forum. And good luck next week. Maybe a fruitful trip and experience. Thank you so much. Sorry.